Picture this moment. You discover a wallet filled with cash on an empty street. No one sees you. No cameras record your choice. In this solitary instant, what determines the rightness or wrongness of your action? Is it the consequences? Your feelings? Social conventions? After decades developing my critical system here in Königsberg, I can tell you with absolute certainty, there exists one universal law that defines right from wrong, independent of circumstances, cultures, or personal desires. This law emerges not from divine command or social contract, but from the very structure of rational thought itself. Through rigorous analysis of pure practical reason, I discovered that morality possesses the same universal necessity as mathematics or logic. Today, you will learn this supreme principle of ethics, the categorical imperative, and understand why it alone provides the unshakable foundation for determining moral rightness. Prepare to discover how reason itself commands what you ought to do, regardless of what you want to do. Chapter 1: The Crisis of Moral Relativism and the Demand for Universal Law. Modern society suffers from a profound moral confusion. Some claim ethics are merely cultural preferences. What's right in one society becomes wrong in another. Others insist morality emerges from consequences. Actions are right if they produce good outcomes. Still others argue that morality springs from emotions, divine commands, or social agreements. This relativistic chaos leaves rational beings adrift in a sea of contradictory moral claims. During my critical period, I recognize this confusion stems from seeking morality's foundation in the wrong place. If ethics depend on culture, they lack universality. If they depend on consequences, they lack certainty. We cannot know all results of our actions. If they depend on emotions, they lack objectivity. Feelings vary between individuals and circumstances. If they depend on divine commands, they lack rational foundation for those who reason differently about divinity. The fundamental error lies in grounding morality in anything empirical, anything drawn from experience. Experience varies. Cultures differ. Consequences remain uncertain. Emotions fluctuate. But reason's structure remains constant across all rational beings. Just as mathematical truths hold universally, 2 + 2 = 4 whether you're in Königsberg or New York, whether you're rich or poor, happy or sad, moral truths must possess the same rational necessity. Consider the logical impossibility of moral relativism. If cultures truly determine right and wrong, then criticism of slavery, genocide, or oppression becomes impossible. These practices were accepted in some societies. But our moral outrage at such practices reveals our conviction that certain principles transcend cultural boundaries. This conviction demands rational justification. The categorical imperative emerges from this demand. Unlike hypothetical imperatives that command conditionally, if you want X, do Y, the categorical imperative commands unconditionally, do Y, period. This unconditional command cannot derive from desires, consequences, or empirical facts, but only from reason's own lawmaking capacity. Just as reason legislates universal laws in mathematics and logic, practical reason legislates universal laws in ethics. This represents my Copernican revolution in ethics. Instead of seeking morality in external authorities or empirical facts, we discover it in reason's own structure. The moral law dwells within us as rational beings, not as arbitrary command but as the necessary form of rational willing itself. Chapter 2: The Categorical Imperative, Act Only According to Universal Law. The supreme principle of morality commands, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. This formula reveals morality's rational foundation by testing the logical consistency of our intended actions. Every action follows a maxim, a subjective principle or rule we adopt. When lying, we follow the maxim, when it suits my purposes, I will make false promises. When helping others, we follow the maxim, when I encounter those in need, I will assist them. The categorical imperative tests these maxims by asking, can I rationally will this maxim to become a universal law governing all rational beings? Consider lying. If everyone adopted the maxim, make false promises when convenient, the institution of promising would collapse. Promises depend on general expectation of truthfulness. Universal false promising creates a logical contradiction. Promises become impossible in a world where everyone expects lies. Since I cannot rationally will universal lying without destroying the very possibility of promises, lying violates the categorical imperative. This test reveals why certain actions are inherently wrong. Theft cannot be universalized. Universal stealing eliminates property rights that make theft possible. Murder cannot be universalized. Universal killing destroys the community of rational beings that gives moral commands meaning. Promise breaking cannot be universalized. Universal deception eliminates trust necessary for promises. Contrast this with morally permissible actions. I can universalize the maxim, keep promises, without logical contradiction. A world where everyone keeps promises remains coherent and desirable. I can universalize, help those in need, without destroying the conditions that make helping possible. The universalizability test works because morality must apply equally to all rational beings. If I claim the right to lie but deny others this same right, I violate reason's demand for consistency. Moral principles must be universal or they cease to be moral. They become mere expressions of personal preference or arbitrary power. This universality distinguishes moral commands from prudential advice. Prudence says, don't lie because you might get caught. Morality says, don't lie because lying cannot be universally practiced by rational beings. The moral command holds regardless of consequences, circumstances, or personal desires. Critics object that this test seems too abstract or rigid. But remember, we seek the supreme principle underlying all moral judgment. Just as mathematical proofs follow logical necessity rather than convenience, moral principles must follow rational necessity rather than empirical flexibility. The categorical imperative provides the logical foundation upon which all genuine moral reasoning builds. Chapter 3: Treating Humanity as an End, the Foundation of Human Dignity. The categorical imperative reveals another fundamental formulation: act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never merely as a means. This principle establishes human dignity as the cornerstone of all ethical thinking. What distinguishes human beings from everything else in nature? Rational beings possess the capacity to act according to self-imposed laws. We can choose our principles rather than being determined by instinct or external forces. This autonomy grants humans absolute worth that cannot be measured against any price or exchanged for any goods. Everything in nature has either a price or lacks value entirely. Commodities have market prices, they can be exchanged for equivalents. Talents and skills have fancy prices, they exceed market value but remain measurable. But rational humanity possesses dignity, absolute, incomparable worth that elevates it above all price. When we use someone merely as a means, we treat them as having only instrumental value, like a tool for achieving our purposes. The liar uses the listener as a mere means to achieve personal goals, ignoring the listener's rational capacity to make informed decisions. The manipulator treats others as instruments for personal benefit, denying their autonomous agency. But humans inevitably serve as means in countless interactions. Employees serve employers' purposes, teachers serve students' educational goals, doctors serve patients' health needs. The prohibition targets using others merely as means, not using them as means at all. Treating someone as an end requires respecting their rational autonomy even while benefiting from their cooperation. Consider informed consent in medical procedures. Doctors use patients as means to practice medicine, and patients use doctors as means to health. But ethical medical practice treats patients as ends by fully informing them, respecting their decisions, and prioritizing their autonomous choices over medical convenience. The patient participates as a rational agent, not merely a body to be manipulated. This principle revolutionizes how we approach contemporary moral issues. In employment, workers must be treated as rational agents capable of meaningful choice, not merely productive units. In relationships, partners must respect each other's autonomy, not manipulate for personal satisfaction. In politics, citizens must be treated as rational beings capable of self-governance, not masses to be controlled through deception. The humanity formula connects directly to the universal law formula. When I universalize my maxims, I implicitly treat all rational beings as equal legislators in the kingdom of moral law. I cannot grant myself privileges I deny others without treating them as lesser beings. Respecting humanity as an end means recognizing every person's equal dignity as a rational lawmaker in the moral community. Take a moment to examine your daily interactions. How often do you treat others, family members, co-workers, strangers, as mere instruments for your convenience rather than as rational beings deserving respect? Chapter 4, Goodwill and Moral Worth, Why Intentions Matter More Than Outcomes. Nothing in the world, indeed, nothing beyond the world, can possibly be conceived that could be called good without qualification except a goodwill. Intelligence, wit, judgment, courage, resolution, perseverance, and power bring countless benefits, yet these gifts become harmful when employed by an evil will. Wealth, honor, health, and happiness itself create arrogance and corruption without goodwill to regulate their use. This analysis reveals a fundamental truth: moral worth resides not in actions' consequences but in the will that produces them. The shopkeeper who acts honestly from fear of detection performs the same external action as one who acts honestly from duty, but only the latter possesses moral worth. Results matter for pragmatic evaluation, but intention determines moral evaluation. I distinguish three types of actions regarding duty. First, actions contrary to duty clearly lack moral worth. The murderer and thief violate obvious moral obligations. Second, actions performed according to duty but from inclination, helping others because it brings personal satisfaction, or maintaining honesty because deception feels uncomfortable. These actions conform to moral requirements but spring from natural impulses rather than moral motivation. Third, actions performed from duty despite contrary inclinations possess genuine moral worth. The person who helps others despite personal inconvenience, who maintains honesty despite advantageous opportunities for deception, who keeps promises despite changed circumstances, these actions demonstrate the goodwill operating independently of natural desires. This distinction matters crucially for moral development. If moral worth came from consequences, we would praise the lucky fool whose ignorant actions accidentally benefit others while condemning the wise person whose careful actions meet unexpected obstacles. If moral worth came from natural inclinations, we would have no reason to cultivate virtue beyond what feels comfortable. But moral worth comes from acting according to duty because it is duty. This requires recognizing moral obligations through reason, choosing to follow these obligations despite competing desires, and maintaining this commitment regardless of external circumstances. The goodwill demonstrates human capacity to transcend animal nature through rational self-determination. Consider healthcare workers during dangerous epidemics. Those who serve patients from natural sympathy deserve praise, but those who serve despite fear, exhaustion, and personal risk demonstrate the highest moral worth. Their actions spring from recognition of duty rather than inclination, proving human ability to act on principle rather than impulse. This emphasis on intention doesn't diminish the importance of consequences, we should strive for effective action that actually helps others. But it locates moral evaluation in the realm we can control, our own choices and motivations. External circumstances, other people's actions, and unforeseeable consequences lie beyond our direct control. We can only control our own will and its conformity to moral law. The good will represents what makes human beings worthy of happiness, even when happiness eludes them. The virtuous person deserving happiness possesses inherently greater worth than the fortunate person who stumbles into pleasure without merit. Chapter 5: Freedom and Moral Responsibility, Escaping the Chains of Determinism. The most profound challenge to morality comes from determinism, the view that all events, including human actions, result from prior causes according to natural laws. If my choices are merely links in a causal chain stretching back to forces beyond my control, how can I bear moral responsibility for my actions? This antinomy between freedom and determinism threatened to destroy the entire moral enterprise until my critical philosophy revealed their reconciliation. The resolution lies in distinguishing between two standpoints from which we can view human beings, the sensible world and the intelligible world. From the sensible standpoint, humans appear as natural phenomena subject to causal laws. Neuroscience reveals how brain states correlate with decisions. Psychology shows how past experiences shape current choices. Sociology demonstrates how social forces influence behavior. From this perspective, humans seem as determined as falling stones or growing plants. But humans also possess the capacity to view themselves from the intelligible standpoint, as rational beings capable of acting according to self-imposed principles. When I deliberate about what to do, I cannot view my decision as already determined. The very process of rational deliberation presupposes that I can choose between alternatives based on principles I recognize as valid. This dual perspective explains moral responsibility without denying natural causation. The same action can be both causally determined from the sensible standpoint and freely chosen from the intelligible standpoint. When I lie to avoid embarrassment, neurophysiology might explain the brain processes involved, but moral evaluation concerns whether I could have chosen differently based on rational principles. Freedom in the moral sense means autonomy, the capacity to act according to laws I give myself through reason rather than being determined by external forces or internal impulses. A person driven by uncontrollable desires lacks freedom even if no external constraints exist. True freedom requires the ability to step back from immediate inclinations and ask, what principle should guide my action? This analysis reveals why we hold people responsible for moral failures but not for natural disasters. Moral responsibility presupposes the capacity for rational self-determination. We can criticize the person who chooses dishonesty because they possess the ability to recognize and follow moral principles. We cannot criticize the earthquake for destroying buildings because natural phenomena lack rational agency. Consider addiction treatment programs. Effective approaches recognize both the biological determinants of addictive behavior and the person's capacity for rational choice. Medical intervention addresses physiological factors while counseling develops the person's ability to recognize and follow principles that support recovery. This dual approach respects both the sensible and intelligible aspects of human nature. The reality of moral freedom doesn't require exemption from natural causation but rather the capacity to introduce rational principles into the causal order. When I act from duty, I introduce a new kind of causation through reason rather than mere natural force. This rational causation makes genuine moral agency possible within the natural world. Take time to reflect on your own moral choices. Can you identify moments when you acted against inclination because reason demanded it? These experiences reveal your participation in the intelligible world of moral freedom. Chapter 6: The Postulates of Practical Reason, Why Morality Demands Faith. Practical reason, while establishing morality's foundation independently of theoretical knowledge, nevertheless generates certain rational demands that extend beyond empirical verification. The moral law commands unconditionally, but this command implies certain conditions must be possible for moral striving to make sense. These implications, the postulates of practical reason, include immortality, freedom, and God's existence. The highest good combines virtue and happiness in perfect proportion, moral worth rewarded with appropriate well-being. Pure virtue without regard for happiness reduces humans to moral machines, while happiness without virtue degrades us to pleasure-seeking animals. Rational beings naturally seek both moral worth and deserved happiness, making their combination the complete object of practical reason. But experience reveals no necessary connection between virtue and happiness. The virtuous often suffer while the vicious prosper. Natural laws operate independently of moral merit, diseases afflict good and evil alike, economic systems reward cunning over virtue, political power favors manipulation over principle. This disconnection between moral worth and natural reward seems to make moral striving ultimately futile. The postulate of immortality addresses this problem by providing unlimited time for moral progress. Complete virtue, perfect conformity of will to moral law, exceeds finite human capacity, but immortal existence allows endless approximation toward this ideal. The soul's immortality becomes a practical necessity for moral development to reach its proper goal. The postulate of God's existence ensures the possibility of highest good by guaranteeing ultimate harmony between virtue and happiness. Only a supreme being possessing both perfect knowledge and unlimited power could establish the necessary connection between moral worth and appropriate reward. God's existence becomes practically necessary as the condition making moral striving ultimately meaningful. These postulates represent rational faith, not theoretical knowledge. I cannot prove God's existence through pure reason. The ontological, cosmological, and teleological arguments fail to demonstrate divine reality conclusively. But practical reason demands God's existence as the condition of morality's ultimate coherence. This faith differs from arbitrary belief because it springs from reason's own moral requirements. Modern secular morality often struggles with this implication. If moral commands lack ultimate grounding in a perfect moral order, they seem to reduce to human conventions or evolutionary accidents. The categorical imperative's unconditional authority requires more than social utility or biological advantage. It demands recognition of a moral order that transcends natural causation. This doesn't mean morality depends on religious belief for its immediate validity. The categorical imperative binds all rational beings regardless of their theological commitments. But moral seriousness naturally leads to questions about ultimate meaning that transcend empirical investigation. The person who truly commits to moral living cannot avoid wondering whether virtue ultimately matters in a universe that seems indifferent to moral worth. Consider how contemporary discussions of social justice implicitly invoke these postulates. Demands for justice assume human dignity has ultimate significance, not merely temporary utility. Calls for accountability presuppose that moral failures deserve response even when legal punishment seems unlikely. These convictions reveal practical faith in a moral order that extends beyond empirical verification. Chapter 7: Applying Kantian Ethics to Contemporary American Moral Challenges. Modern American society faces unprecedented ethical challenges that reveal the categorical imperative's continued relevance. Technology, bioethics, social justice, and political polarization create moral dilemmas that require systematic rational analysis rather than emotional reactions or utilitarian calculations. Consider artificial intelligence and automation. When companies replace human workers with machines, do they treat employees merely as means to profit maximization? The humanity formula demands respecting workers' rational dignity through retraining programs, advance notice, and recognition of their worth beyond economic productivity. Universalizing the maxim, "replace workers without regard for their welfare," would create a society where no one could rationally plan a stable life, undermining the social cooperation that makes economic systems possible. Bioethical issues reveal the categorical imperative's power to clarify complex moral terrain. In genetic engineering, we must ask whether modifications treat future persons as ends in themselves or merely as means to parental preferences. Can we universalize genetic enhancement without creating unjust advantages for the wealthy? Does gene therapy that prevents suffering respect human dignity, while cosmetic genetic modification treats humans as designer objects? Social media platforms create new opportunities for treating others merely as means. When we share information without verification, we use our audience as instruments for self-expression without respecting their rational need for truth. When we engage in online harassment, we deny others dignity as rational beings deserving respectful discourse. The maxim, "spread unverified information when it supports my views," cannot be universalized without destroying the foundations of democratic deliberation. Criminal justice applications reveal how Kantian principles could reform American legal systems. Punishment must respect human dignity. Even criminals retain rational agency that deserves recognition. This prohibits cruel punishments that treat offenders as mere objects of social vengeance while requiring consequences that acknowledge their capacity for moral improvement. The death penalty becomes questionable not primarily because of its consequences but because it treats human life as having conditional rather than absolute worth. Contemporary civil rights movements exemplify Kantian principles in action. When activists demand equal treatment regardless of race, gender, or sexual orientation, they invoke the universalizability test. Moral principles must apply equally to all rational beings. When they insist on dignity and respect, they apply the humanity formula: no one should be treated merely as means to others' comfort or traditional arrangements. Economic inequality challenges require Kantian analysis of our duties to others. While the categorical imperative doesn't prescribe specific economic policies, it prohibits maxims that exploit others' desperation or treat poverty as acceptable for social convenience. We cannot universalize economic systems that deny some people realistic opportunities for rational self-development without contradicting our commitment to human dignity. Political polarization tests our commitment to treating opponents as rational beings rather than enemies to be defeated. Democratic discourse requires assuming others can respond to reasons, changing our minds when presented with better arguments, and maintaining civility even during fundamental disagreements. The maxim, "defeat political opponents by any means necessary," cannot be universalized without destroying the democratic process itself. These applications demonstrate that Kantian ethics provides practical guidance for contemporary moral challenges while maintaining rigorous rational foundations that transcend cultural relativity and utilitarian calculations. Conclusion. The categorical imperative stands as humanity's greatest discovery in practical philosophy, a universal law that defines right from wrong through reason alone. This supreme principle transcends cultural boundaries, personal preferences, and consequence calculations to establish morality on unshakable rational foundations. When you face ethical dilemmas, apply the universalizability test. Can you will your maxim to become universal law? Respect the humanity formula. Are you treating all persons as ends in themselves, never merely as means? These questions unlock moral clarity in our complex world. The moral law within you possesses the same necessity as the starry heavens above. Both reveal reason's capacity to discover universal truths that command our respect. Your rational nature grants you the dignity to participate in moral legislation for all humanity. This tremendous responsibility and privilege calls you to live according to practical reason's demands, honoring the autonomy that makes you truly human. Through disciplined application of these principles, you join the kingdom of rational beings united by shared commitment to moral law.